Hello, today I'm going to be reviewing The Last Wish. Not this Last Wish, but Puss in Boots The Last Wish. Now, one quick thing I want to mention before I get into my review is that this is a review of this movie only, as a movie, not as a sequel. I haven't actually seen the first Puss in Boots for at least maybe 5 or 6 years. All I can really remember is Humpty Dumpty was in it. So yeah, I can't really say how good it is as a sequel, but I will be talking about what I liked about this movie. Now, to give a very basic overview of the plot, there's this star, this like shooting star, which crashed into this forest and made it into like a dark magical forest or something. And legend says if you go to this place, you can and find where the star landed, you will be granted a wish. Most of the characters end up in pursuit of this wish for various reasons. I'll go into all the characters who go after it and all their motivations and stuff a bit later. Now, our main character is Puss in Boots. The start of the movie does a really good job of setting him up as this like arrogant, fearless outlaw who loves himself and doesn't really have any like fear or concern or anything. The movie opens with him getting into like a bit of a fight with some people, and then in the commotion this giant gets woken up, so he has to fight the giant to save the town and all that. He deals with it pretty easily, but then a bell falls on him and he dies. But he comes back because he's a cat who has 9 lives. Wakes up in like a doctor's office, and the doctor starts talking to him about how he's on his last life. Now, this is where Puss in Boots' story really begins. See, now that he's on his last life, if he dies, this time he dies for good, which kind of freaks him out a bit. And then not long after finding out, he has an encounter with this mysterious hooded figure who ends up attacking him and who actually ends up beating him in combat. Something that Puss in Boots is not used to. And this hooded figure is revealed to be Death himself, which understandably freaks out Puss, so he runs away. He buries all his stuff, pretends that Puss in Boots is dead, and takes on a new identity. Now, he eventually gets dragged into the plot when he hears about the shooting star, and he wants to basically wish for all his lives back. So he decides to get his gear back together, and he goes on this quest to get the wish. This movie really explores his fear pretty well through death. One thing that's established early on in the movie, apparently Puss in Boots has never been touched by a blade. But during his fight with Death at the start of the film, he actually gets cut. There's this really good moment where a bit of blood like runs down his face, and he like touches it in his hand and looks at it. And there's this moment of fear which is shown really well, like all his hairs go stiff, stand up. And throughout the course of the film, Death is slowly stalking Puss. There's several times throughout the movie where you'll hear this distinctive whistle that Death makes. Like the music will quieten down, all the sound will quieten down. You'll just hear this distinctive whistle he has as Puss notices him in the distance watching. And it like freaks Puss out to no end. There's even this part later on during like a big fight with lots of the antagonists where Puss looks over in the distance upon hearing the distinctive whistle, and he just sees Death watching. And in response, Puss runs away, utterly terrified. Overall, it was handled pretty well. The moments where Death shows up are genuinely chilling. You can really feel the fear that Puss has. And I really like how the movie sort of explores that fear that he has. And he has to slowly, throughout the course of the film, start to open up to his friends about this fear. And it sort of begins to break down that fearless, arrogant persona he has. So it was really fascinating. And yeah, Death was a really, really good antagonist. Overall, the antagonists were really well done in this movie. Obviously, Death, I think, was really well done. But then you also have another couple antagonists. First of all, there's Big Jack Horner, who fulfills that role of like an unapologetic villain who's evil and knows he's evil and is glad to be evil. He doesn't have much depth, but he's a pretty good inclusion, and I like how they sort of poke fun at the whole villains having tragic backstories thing. His motivation is essentially just that he wants to control all magic in the world, so he has unlimited power essentially. Just because why not? He's pretty entertaining to watch, and he's contrasted pretty well with the other antagonists. We also have Goldilocks and Three Bears. They serve as antagonists throughout the story, working towards getting the wish themselves, specifically Goldilocks, who's their leader. However, although they're antagonists, I wouldn't say they're villains. See, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, they're sort of in that category of they're not really villains, they're not really heroes. They're somewhere in the between. Now, the main motivation for them to go after the wish is that Goldilocks wants to wish for a family because she wants like a human family, or she thinks she wants like a human family. However, she has to, throughout the course of the film, slowly learn that she's already got a family with the Three Bears. Right at the end of the film, Goldilocks and the Three Bears actually sort of switch over and start helping Puss, and they fight against Jack Horner. So they sort of end up on the good guys team at the end. It was really interesting to see them incorporate a antagonist who slowly realizes they're over their ways and comes good by the end. It's in pretty good contrast to Jack Horner, who's just evil. So you sort of have both of those things. I've neglected to talk about the two characters who sort of join Puss throughout the course of the film. So first we have Kitty Softpaws, who I think was in the first Puss in Boots movie, but I can't really remember much from that. She and Puss were apparently an item, but they haven't been on speaking terms since Puss had cold feet and ditched her at the aisle. So at the start, they're not really on good terms, but they hesitantly agree to work together. And then eventually they start to overcome their personal issues and they sort of like reconnect. It helps that Puss goes through a lot of like character growth throughout the film, which sort of allows him to do that. And we also learn that apparently Kitty Softpaws also didn't show up to the wedding either. So I guess they both had cold feet. And then there's this dog who never gets a proper name, but just goes by Perrito. Perrito is a character who's very, very innocent and very, very optimistic. He's one of those characters who's like oblivious to ill intention, and which I think was handled pretty well in this story. His very trusting and optimistic nature is a nice contrast to Kitty and Puss, who are not so trusting and a lot more, I guess, deceptive. However, they can't help but like him, and the three of them end up sort of becoming like good friends. Perrito was also in one of my favourite scenes of the film. So after that fight I mentioned, where Puss ends up running away, noticing Death watching in the distance, there's actually the scene where Perrito chases after him and finds him like freaking out, hyperventilating and all that. And Perrito just comes over and comforts him, which was a very, very touching and emotional moment. And I think it was a good thing for Puss because this is where he starts to open up a bit more. I honestly think that moment is probably one of the best scenes in the movie. Now, in terms of negatives, there's only one thing that really comes to mind, and that's that some of the animations seemed a bit stiff. Specifically, some of like the fight scenes. Like there's a fight scene right towards the start, and a few of the other ones throughout the film. Animations during these fight scenes seemed quite stiff and just not very well done. Now, I imagine like fight scenes would be particularly tough to animate, but yeah, the way they were animated just wasn't that great. Could have used some more work perhaps. But it's a minor thing and it doesn't really affect the story or the themes too much. It's more of a visual thing. That's my thoughts on Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Overall, I think this is a outstanding film. It was really, really well done. The antagonists were great. The main arc that Puss goes through was really good. He actually has like lots of character growth throughout the film, so it's really good. And his dynamics with his supporting cast is also pretty good. So yeah, overall, really good film. I highly recommend it. I hope you all found this review helpful, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.